Well, good day and welcome to this presentation on Norming Resource Manager. Norming Resource Manager is an application solution that allows you to embed a number of different new features within the Sage 300 environment. As you can see, Resource Manager is an application module written in the SDK for Sage 300. The software development kit allows us to write an application that integrates with all of the key service aspects of Sage 300, including the administrative services for things like security groups, user authorizations, and data integrity, as well as the common services components, which include the company profile, fiscal calendar, scheduling, multi-currency, optional fields, and the tax and bank services. Resource Manager as an SDK or software development kit module runs in the same database as Sage 300 and is fully integrated with the other application modules that you find within Sage 300. So when you're setting up and configuring the application for the first time, you have budget control at a GL account level as well as a project and job cost level for your employee expenses and your purchase requisitions. You also have integrations that allow you to create GL transactions, AP invoice transactions, AR invoice transactions for billing. We integrate with the project and job cost module for both payroll and project costing purposes. And we integrate with the Norming Payroll Manager, which is an international payroll module, as well as the Canadian and US Sage 300 modules. The basic transaction types include employee expenses, timesheets, travel requests, and then depending on the nature of your organization, we have time management applications for timesheets, leave tracking, overtime, and attendance. And what we're focusing on today is the requisition area of Resource Manager for things like item usage requisitions, purchase receipt and PO invoice requisitions, and then AP invoice and AP payment requisitions. We've also recently added sales quotations to the Norming Resource Manager solution. And custom requisitions is the idea that you can create a workflow approval around any master file or transaction process within Sage 300. When we look at the requisitions, we're going to be focusing, as I mentioned, on purchase, AP invoice, and AP payment requisitions. And in order to do that, I want to touch on a couple of the setup options before we take you through some transactions. Now, it's possible in the setup and configuration of Resource Manager to determine a default workflow. The workflow approval at a document level allows you to define how you want certain documents to be routed and approved within your organization. When we look at a purchase requisition as an example, we have requisitions that need to be approved so that you can determine who within the organization is going to participate in that approval process. We can have specific employees, we can have supervisors, which by definition is a person's direct report. We can have region, division, or department managers if you configure the system for regions, divisions, and departments. If you're integrated with project and job cost, you have PJC contract managers. You can also have budget managers, and a fairly new feature, what we call custom roles, where you can define a specific role outside of the standard users within Sage 300. Now, the other thing to note is that we have an action that we call decision. Decision actions as part of the workflow process allows you as an individual or an organization to completely customize the business logic around how you want these documents approved. So it might be on a purchase requisition that you're interested in defining a different approval process based on the nature of the item, which is what you're seeing in the example here. Based on the item's category that we're purchasing, it may be required to have a different level of approval within the organization, or you might add an additional level. Technically speaking, you can have up to 99 levels of approval within the approval workflows, so there really are no arbitrary limitations. You can also add other conditions or other variables that are part of the approval process. And as you can see here, we can include budget as one of the other criteria to determine how many people or at what level these people need to be within the organization to approve a purchase request. Also note that we use email as an alert function within the system. So when we submit, when we reject, or when we approve a transaction, whether that's a purchase receipt, a PO invoice, an AP invoice, an AP payment, virtually any of the documents that we have supported within Resource Manager, you can send these email notifications. The email notifications are something that you can create and customize as well through the email templates. So again, depending on the document type, let's say purchase requisition, you customize the wording in the body of the email, and you can use variables that we supply to identify the employee name, the approver name, and possibly the date. So this is a notification via email that your purchase requisition was approved. There's also some defined notes that you could add based on policies for why a purchase was rejected. And when it's submitted, we will send notification to a manager that they need to review and approve the purchase requisition. And because we're linked to a web-based portal, there's a URL hot link in the system that allows you to click on the email and update the approval for that purchase requisition directly through the email. So as we're doing these configurations in the back office, we're also then linking to a web portal that we call ESS, or Employee Self-Service Portal. Now notice that it does use Windows authentication, so if you want to use single sign-on and use a Windows ID and password to authenticate your users within Norming Resource Manager, that's possible. You also have control through the administrative portal, where you can create access rights based on the document types that you're supporting within Resource Manager. So as you define and approve your user groups and individual users by company, you'll be able to determine what documents they can produce within Resource Manager. And so for things like purchase requisitions, you can determine the layout of the form that's visible within the web and choose whether it's going to be displayed or not. And then if it is displayed, is it editable or not, both at the submitter level as well as the approver level. And there are other permissions that you can add based on the documents that you want to include. Different language sets are supported, and also date formats and things like that. So this is true both for the purchase requisitions, the receipt, the invoice, and the AP invoice or AP payment requisitions that are part of the system. And we'll do other presentations on timesheet and expenses with travel requests that will highlight the same type of information. Now, while we're here in the administrative portal, I want to highlight a couple of other things that we have, things like schedules. Scheduled processes allow you to create routines such as missing timesheet, approval reminders, or other things where you can specify a date and a time that you would like to send out an email. So let's say Friday afternoon at noon, you would like to send out an email to remind managers to do their approvals and make sure that things are submitted on time. So this helps avoid bottlenecks in the organization, and you can schedule these broadcast emails to go out at any point in time as a reminder. There's also a to-do list, and the to-do list is going to review all the outstanding documents by entity. So as you were creating expense reports or purchase requisitions, if that manager is away or sick for some reason, you could flag it and do the approval in the back office, or you could transfer it to one of the other managers in the organization and have them do the approval on their behalf. So the system is really facilitating remote access through a web portal for non-Sage 300 users so that you can initiate and submit for approval and then get approved different documents that will then be updated directly into Sage 300 as a batch transaction. And then from there, update the standard core financial and operations modules of Sage 300. So this is really timely in a world where we have workers who are remote, where they're traveling, where they're working from home, and they need to be able to stay in touch with what's happening in the organization. They need to capture activities such as purchases or expenses or timesheets and be able to record this information, get it properly approved, and then updated into Sage 300. But as I say, the benefit is really that these people have access to information and can publish information into Sage 300 without actually logging into Sage 300 and consuming a land pack license in the system. In most cases, these people don't need to see the transaction details as part of Sage 300, but they do need to capture activity to record these transactions in Sage 300. So let's get started with an example of a purchase transaction. Now, I mentioned there's some setup options here. These options determine access rights for the various users. So what you can do is you can create your own list of items for inventory purchases. You can also create different purchase types that will restrict access by vendor or by item. And these purchase types will then determine the type of access individuals have to the various features and modules within Sage 300. So let's say it's job related. We may want this updating the project and job cost module within Sage 300, and then you would choose just specific vendors rather than all vendors that you want to be able to buy for specific jobs. You also have the ability to add quotation capability or request for quote, and you can do that at a vendor or vendor contact level. And depending on the purchase type, these options will display differently on the pages. So in this case, where we're more concerned about budget control, we've got all vendors that are allowed, but only certain items from inventory control. And then you can also specify at a GL account level what accounts people are able to purchase against. And again, you've got the quotation feature. So the purchase types allow us to control through the configuration in the back office the items, the vendors, the GL accounts that people can create purchase transactions for. And then when we post these transactions into Sage 300, you can also tell the system whether you want to create a purchase order or a purchase requisition. Of course, you would use the purchase requisition in a case where you have multiple purchase requests coming into the system and you'd like to consolidate all those requisitions onto one PO based on vendor. So the buyers would determine the individual users that you can assign purchasing rights, and then you will determine which purchase type they participate in, which division, which region, or which department. And this leads us to some of the other configuration options globally. So as an example, a divisional breakdown that you create within Resource Manager will have an assigned manager for that region or division. And this can be tied to a GL segment if you'd like, but it also identifies the individual manager for that particular region, department, or division. And so that means we can use an alias in the approval workflow, division manager, and the system will know based on the division I'm purchasing for which manager needs to do the approval. So let's take a look at an actual transaction. We will log in as a particular user, and that user will have access to various Sage 300 company databases depending on what you're buying. And in this case, we're going to use a project job cost related company. This one links to Canadian payroll, so we'll use that company when we do a timesheet presentation, which will be a separate video. And I've got one using PJC projects, which is the one we'll use today for the purchasing and AP invoice presentation. So as we sign in to a select entity, it's going to present to us a list of icons which determine my access rights by transaction type or document type in Sage 300. So you can see here I've got purchase requisition and purchase receipt capability and AP invoice capability, which is where we're going to focus today. So if I click on the purchase requisition, you can see in the portal that I can post other previously recorded purchase requests. And in this case, I've generated a PO within Sage 300. So this purchase requisition has a purchase request number, which is a document number within Resource Manager, but it's also integrated to the items that were purchased. There are website links, so you can click on these links and it takes you to a specific website, which might be an online catalog for a particular vendor that you're buying from. And you notice that it's got on-hand quantities, committed quantities on PO, on purchase request, with the unit cost information, any comments and instructions, and the GL account that is going to be posted to for that particular purchase. And there are attachments and quotations that we could also use to control the purchase of these items. And the approval audit trail is here, so you can see with a date and a timestamp the person who submitted it, the person who approved it, and any comments that were made. And notice that we have a substitution capability where a manager who knows they're going to be away can substitute another manager to take care of their approvals while they're unavailable. There's also budget capability where I can see the item budget, and that would be assigned a budget code and maybe a budget center, which is a department. And then the budget amount for purchases that we've specified for that particular item, and then the actual amount that's been purchased so far, anything pending on other purchase requests, and that gives you a net available amount, and then the impact that this requisition is going to have on that purchase. And this is something that we can do during the approval process to ensure that we're not going over budget. Now these are existing purchase requests. We also have one that's awaiting approval. So it's been set up and sent in, and we're waiting for the manager to do the approval. And there's a rejected status for anything that was refused for some reason. But to show you the process in full, we'll click on the New button and walk you through how you would set up a purchase request. So based on the purchase type, when it's job related, you notice that there's a restriction on the number of vendors that we can use. There's also ship via information that might be necessary. So all of the information that's been set up within Sage 100 is visible to the web form. It's just that I haven't logged in to Sage 300. So I can still provide access to Sage 300 information without actually logging in because the web portal is fully integrated into Sage 300. Now we default the requisitioner's name and date, and then we can start entering the information for a particular purchase. Now because we filled in the vendor on the header, you notice that as soon as I click on a detail line, it picks up the vendor details, but I can always override that at a line level on the purchase requisition. Now, in terms of the project, if I have a project code, then I would see that project code listed as part of the purchase transaction, and then the location details and the expected arrival dates. And then, of course, we could attach the attachment and any quotation details. So I could add a quote, choose a vendor, and then request a quote, and then determine if that was which document I wanted to attach to that particular quote. And then I would be able to check the quotation to see that it was valid and make sure that everything is working properly. Now in this case, I'm not linked into the projects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a different company for this employee. And instead of the PJC projects, we'll use PJC only, which is just using the standard PJC module from Sage 300. So when I click on New, if we're fully integrated, then we will see a drop-down list of the contracts that are available within PJC. and then the individual projects, and then the categories. So everything that you would expect to see in a normal transaction where you're linking purchases to project and job cost will be visible within the system. And then the item number is defined by the setup of the PJC contract in Sage 300. And then in this case, we're specifying a location. So all the location details are here. And let's say we needed 10 of those. It knows the unit cost, and it does the extension of that. And then, of course, we could have comments and instructions there. And if we want to add a comment or an instruction, we can do that. We insert that, and we say, please deliver to job site. And that will then flow with the transaction. Now, again, we talked about the link. So we could add a link to a web catalog, and that would be visible as part of the review and approval process. And then if we wanted to add a quotation, we could say, if we had set up some quotations, that we're proving that we've gone out and asked for quotations from particular vendors. So if we save this and it creates a reference number, purchase request 7, we're then able to then go in and add a quote or request a quote from a particular vendor. And we can add that by choosing a particular vendor. And let's say we were going to choose that vendor, and then the vendor name, due by invoice date is the terms, and then we might want to copy to some other internal email address. The expiry date might be tomorrow because this is something that we need urgently. And then the vendor would add their own comments, and we would send that off using an email template to that particular vendor. But we can certainly add multiple vendor details for these contracts and these quotations, and they will have different email addresses, different expiry dates. And to be fair, let's say we want them both as of a certain date, and we would send those off. So we can add as many quotations in the system as we need to, and just keep adding based on the vendor details. And those quotation details will give us information about whether the vendor is a preferred vendor or not, and what their particular price is for a particular item, and what their normal lead time is with comments. And we can also use vendor price if that's been set up in Sage 300. So again, you have access to all of this information, and once you have multiple quotes listed, you would put the star beside the one that you want to accept, and that's the one that would appear on the purchase requisition. So once we've got all of that information recorded on a purchase, then we can submit that into the workflow. And when we submit that into the workflow, the approval audit trail is exposed. So we know in this case that Robert is sending in the purchase request, Marilyn is going to do the approval, and as I mentioned, there's a date and a timestamp for each of those steps. Now, it is possible to unsubmit. If for some reason I felt like I needed to change this before the manager's done an approval, I could unsubmit, resubmit. What we'll do in this case is we'll log out as Robert and we'll log in as Marilyn. And we need to choose the same company, which was PJC only. And she's got a notification on her to approved list. Now, we've talked about the fact that this is a web portal, but there's also the ability to use web apps on a smartphone device. So if I went to the Google Play Store and I checked norming, there's an e-portal for Resource Manager that allows you to do submissions and approvals on a smartphone device or a tablet. These are native to Android or native to iOS devices. So obviously, in the case of Android, you would come to Google Play Store. In the case of iOS, you'd go to the iTunes Store. But just so you know that this is a fully remote web app system. So you can either use the standard ESS, Employee Self-Service Portal, or you can use native Android or iOS apps. So when I log in as the manager, there's the purchase request PR7 that we were looking at today. They would click on that link if they want to review the details. They could see any attachment that I would have attached, and they can check the quotation, that it's valid. They can approve with comments or reject. In this case, we'll just approve with comments, say OK, and it removes that transaction from the portal. And where does it end up? It ends up in Sage 300 as a purchase requisition. So if you remember, it was PR7, that was the document, and there it is as a batch transaction in Sage 300 as part of the Resource Manager module, and there's today's date. So I can review this as a back office function now. And it's true that you might want someone from finance and accounting as part of the approval on the web portal first before it gets to this stage. But you notice that you could reject this purchase as a back office function if you activate that feature within Resource Manager. But it knows that it's related to a project within PJC. It's got the category, the cost class, and it's got the link to the website for the catalog. It's got the pricing based on the quote, because if you remember when we picked up the item price, it was $4.99, but we accepted the quote at $500. And then, so there's the quotation information that comes across. And then the comments, if you remember, we added some instructions. So when we check the instruction, please deliver to the job site, is here as well. So any information that we captured in the portal is going to be set up in this transaction as well. If we had added an attachment, it would be visible. The approval audit trail is here, any optional fields that you used, and the rest of the details. So we can go ahead and post this as a transaction, and it will move this purchase entry into the PO module. So a purchase order has been created. And now if we can see that it's been submitted. And now if we go over to the project and job cost module, we will see, sorry, the PO module is what I wanted. The PO transactions here for the PO entry. There'll be a purchase order relating to the purchase of the oil painting. So there it is, the requisition on today's date. PR7 was our document number. It's been set up as a purchase order now, and it knows that it's going to be updating these purchase costs to the project that we've defined on the original purchase request. Okay, so that's the integration. Very tight, very seamless. There's no importing or exporting of data. Once we create the purchase transaction in Sage 300, in the Norming Resource Manager portal, it gets updated directly into Sage 300 as a requisition transaction, in this case as a purchase requisition. It will do the same thing for PO receipts and PO invoices as well. So in order to streamline the presentation for today's purposes, let's jump over to the AP invoice. So if you're not using the purchase orders module, but you make your purchases via AP, it's possible to generate an AP invoice requisition. So I will log back in as Robert Embleton. We'll choose the same company, the PJC only, but this time instead of a purchase transaction, we will do an AP invoice transaction. And again, we've got historical information for other AP invoices that have been set up previously. I'm going to click on the new so that we can create an AP invoice. And again, I've got access to all my vendors if I need them within the system. I've got document numbers. So presumably what you would be doing is entering the invoice number here to capture it. So let's say it's 731. And that's the invoice number that will be generated in accounts payable in Sage 300. You have different optional fields that you could show on the header, but you can also show optional fields on a detail line as well. And this is accessing all of the distribution codes within Sage 300. And then I can enter the amount. Let's say it's $450. And I could either enter the tax or calculate the tax. And then I can add comments here. And this comment, like you saw with the instruction, will flow with the transaction. Now let's say we need to attach a document. Let's say this is the equipment rented. And if we browse, we can pick up any file format that we wish. So it could be a PDF, a Word doc, an Excel sheet, doesn't really matter. And you could have separate documents attached for every line item on the document itself. So I've got my transaction, I've got my attachment. Let's go ahead and submit that into the workflow. And again, the approval audit trail is exposed, and Marilyn's going to be reviewing and approving this AP invoice. So I log out as myself and log in as Marilyn. And we choose the appropriate Sage 300 company. And this time you will see that there's an approval list that includes an AP invoice requisition. So there's the invoice 731 that we set up today. And this time you see the attachment is visible during the approval process. So that's the nice piece of equipment that we rented. And if we're okay with these details, then we can approve or reject. Notice we can also transfer to another manager because it's not often that we rent Jaguars. So we might want another manager on the hook to see that they approve it. And the approval audit trail, in the case where you had multiple levels of approval, that button would show other managers who might have already reviewed and approved the invoice. Because in addition to individual approvers, we also have approver groups. And in some cases, you might say, as long as 2 of these 3 or 4 managers approve a document, we're okay with it. I'm going to go ahead and approve this, say okay. And again, it gets removed from the approval console. And where does it go? It goes into our AP invoice requisition list in Resource Manager. So now we see invoice 731 from today's date, and the details are here. So I can open up the transaction, see the equipment rental details. So in this case, the attachment is here, and I can open up the attachment in Sage 300. The approval audit trail is here with comments, any optional fields, the taxes, and the document details. So again, I have the option to reject this in the back office if I want to, even though it's been approved by an operations manager. But again, that is up to you as to how you see the process working in your organization. And then finally, if we're okay with this, we could go ahead and say it's ready to post, and it will generate an AP invoice for me. So again, notice that there's no rekeying. It's just a matter of capturing the data once in the portal, converting that into a transaction once it's been approved, and then we just move the entry into Sage 300 where it needs to go to update the accounting system. So it's created an AP invoice requisition batch, and there's 4 entries in here. So the last one would be hours. So I'll move to the last entry, and there it is, my requisition for today's date, the equipment rental, which was $450. And it's been posted through with the tax. The comment was also moved up to AP, need to rent equipment. And this is now ready to be posted so that it can be paid. We do support drill down. So even though the document and the approval audit trail is not visible within AP itself, by drilling back to the AP invoice requisition that's captured in the Resource Manager module, you can see the attachment and you can see the approval audit trail. So we maintain the integrity of the transaction by showing you the audit trail right back to the source entry within Resource Manager. So anybody looking at the AP invoice for the first time would be able to see the supporting documentation and the approval audit trail from the AP module by drilling down. So the last transaction we're going to show as part of this presentation is the AP payment. So again, I will log in as myself, and we'll choose the same company, PJC only. And in this case, we do an AP payment requisition. And again, I've got historical payment details. If I click New, I have the option to choose the bank, depending on how many banks are set up within Sage 300. So again, I'm able to see all of the master file details within Sage 300, choose a payment date, choose a type of payment transaction. So we support payment, prepayment, and miscellaneous payment. And the requisition is a payment from CCB, which is the bank. Now I can choose a vendor that I wish to pay, and it will show me all of the invoice details that are outstanding. So let's say I want to pay this invoice for $91.34. So I would choose that, yes. I could add an attachment. Let's say it's a copy of the invoice. So let's say it's an invoice copy, and browse and pick up that invoice. So again, it could be any type of file format that we want. Let's say I'm going to take, actually, let's go over here and we'll choose a different, just make sure I'm not using anything too incriminating. Let's do this one and save that. And then the payment detail. So if I'm okay with that, I would submit. And the approval audit trail shows me that Marilyn's doing the approval. Now, if I unsubmit because I forgot to do something, I just wanted to highlight the sort mechanism here. You notice that I can sort by document number, but I can also sort by due date, and then I can choose the due date. So let's say it was this date and then go. It would show me anything that was due by that date. Let's say if I move forward a couple of months and choose that due date, it limits what's available based on due date. So just wanted to show that you can also filter by type of document. So if it was just invoices I was looking at or just prepayments I was looking at, I can filter on that basis. So that's another nice feature of the system, is being able to filter based on those different criteria. So if we're going to go back and we're going to choose this invoice again and say, yes, I want to go ahead and pay that invoice, and then maybe this one too. We'll pick a couple of different invoices and then submit that into the workflow. And that's going to be Marilyn's job. But you see the submit, unsubmit, submitted is also recorded as individual steps in the approval workflow. So everything that happens with the document is going to be recorded as part of that approval workflow. Now we log in again as Marilyn, and we choose the appropriate Sage 300 company. And the to approve list will have a payment requisition, PY2 from today's date, and the two invoices that we wish to pay. And then there's the attachment, and I can open up that attachment. And it's a sales order in this case, but you notice that it's any type of document is fine. And then we'll go ahead and approve, say OK. Now the one thing I should point out here is that it is possible to approve at a document level as well as an individual line level. So on the purchase request, as an example, we could have approved at a line level, not just the document level. So now we see the requisition list for AP payments. There's the payment that we've set up. And there's one of the invoices that have been paid. And again, the attachment would be here. The approval audit trail would be here. And then the requisition details. Okay. So we can refresh this and then go ahead and say, this is ready to post. And it generates a payment batch. So when we go up to accounts payable and we see the transaction payment batch list, we see there's an EN payment requisition. and we've got the payment. And then, of course, we can drill from the payment entry back into the payment requisition entry. So those are some of the key requisition types within Resource Manager. There is also the custom requisition. So we've predefined requisition types for purchase orders, purchase receipts, PO invoices, item usage, AP invoice, AP payment, and sales quotation. The last one is a custom requisition. And a custom requisition allows you to configure a requisition type that's specific to you. So let's say you wanted to create a requisition type for approving new vendors that are being added into the system. You could create your own custom requisition based on approving new vendors, or it might be based on purchases of fixed assets, or it might be based on adding a new GL account. Virtually any type of master file or transaction entry, or maybe posting of a GL batch, they can be created through the custom requisition. And that custom requisition allows you to link to any table within Sage 300 and then add attachments and show the approval audit trail. So it's treated just like any other transaction type or master file update within Sage 300, but it allows you then the flexibility to create a review and approval process around any activity within Sage 300. So we thank you for your time today. We hope that this presentation was useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your local Sage 300 business partner, or you can contact us via norming. The norming.com website has our contact details. Robert Lavery and Associates. We're the North American distributors for norming products. And we would invite you to check out the system, review the video at your leisure, and if you'd like a one-on-one presentation, please contact your local business partner, and we'd be more than happy to arrange that with you. Thank you so much for your time and attention. We appreciate it.